Welcome to Bishop's Online Tutoring. This is sheet number 7 covering fractions, decimals, and percentages. Write 1 over 4 as a percentage. Now, if this is something that you struggle with, let me just draw it out nice and simply for you over here. You can always just multiply the fraction by 100 over 1. So then 1 times by 100 would be 100, and 4 times by 1 is 4. And now you can simplify. So 2 goes into both 100 and 4, gives us 50 over 2. And then we can divide both of those by 2 again, which gives us 25 over 1, or just 25. So it's 25%. The question's asking us to write 0.23 as a percentage. Now, all we have to do is multiply 0.23 by 100, and what that's going to do is it's going to take the decimal point 2 spaces to the right, so we'll be left with 23. So it's 23%. And also remember, 0.23 has to equal to 23% because 1.0 is equal to 100%. Write 42% as a fraction, give your answer in its simplest form. Now 42% would just be 42 over 100. Now, seeing as both of those are even numbers, we can divide both of them by 2. So 42 divided by 2 is 21, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. Now, I don't think we can simplify this any further, so this would be our answer. 21 over 50. Write 0.15 as a percentage. So going off the same rule as what we discussed earlier, so 1.0 is equal to 100%, so that would mean that 0.15 has to equal to 15%. Write 35% as a fraction, give your answer in its simplest form. So 35% will just be 35 over 100 as a fraction. Now we can see that both of these numbers are divisible by 5, so 35 divided by 5 is 7, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So that's our answer, especially since we can't simplify that any further. Work out 50% of 60 pounds. Now 50% is just a half. So what's half of 60 quid? 30 pounds. Work out 25% of 20 meters. Now there's quite a few different ways that you can work this out, but the way I like to do this is figure out 10%, 10% again, and then 5%. Now the reason I do this is because if you add up 10%, 10%, and 5%, it gives you 25%, and it's really easy to work out 10% and 5%. So 10% of 20 meters is going to be 2, 10% of 20 meters again is going to be 2, 5% is going to be half of 10%, so in this case, 10% is 2, so half of that will be 1. So in total, you will have 25% equals to 5. Write 9 over 10 as a decimal. So 9 over 10 is the same as 90 over 100, or 90%. And now we know that we can write 90% as 0.9 because 1.0 is 100%. Write 3 over 4 as a percentage. Now we can do this a couple of different ways. We can do 3 over 4 times by 100 over 1. That will give us 300 over 4, and then we just carry on simplifying. So both numbers are divisible by 2. So 300 divided by 2 gives us 150. 4 divided by 2 gives us 2. 150 divided by 2 is 75. So it will be 75%. Write 23% as a fraction. Now that's just going to be 23 over 100. Work out 1/5 of 50. Now remember, anytime you have a fractions question and you see of, it just means that you have to multiply the fraction and that number. So we are basically doing 1 over 5 times by 50 over 1. 50 times by 1 is 50. 5 times by 1 is 5. 50 divided by 5 is 10. So our answer is 10. Write 1 over 5 as a percentage. Now, another way that you can do this is just try and get the denominator to 100, and whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Allow me to demonstrate. So we have 1 over 5, and we basically need to turn the 5, i.e. the denominator, into either 10 or 100. Ideally 100, but let's just turn it into 10 for the time being. So to turn it into 10, we would have to multiply it by 2. Whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top as well. So 1 times by 2 is 2. Now, how do we go from 10 to 100? Well, to go from 10 to 100, we have to multiply by 10. Now, whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top as well. So we multiply the top by 10 as well. So 2 times by 10 is 20. Now, 20 over 100 is the same as 20%. Write 0.7 as a percentage. So 0.7 as a percentage would just be 70%. Write 1 over 4 as a percentage. So 1 over 4, to turn that into a percentage, let's just do times by 100 over 1. That gives us 100 over 4, which can simplify down to 50 over 2 because they're both divisible by 2. Now 50 divided by 2 is 25, so it's 25%. Write 0.8 as a percentage. Well, 0.8 is equal to 80%. Write 76% as a decimal. That's just going to be 0.76. Write 45% as a fraction. Give your answer in its simplest form. So 45 as a fraction would be 45 over 100. Now we can simplify that because both of these numbers are divisible by 5. So 5 goes into 45 9 times and 5 goes into 100 20 times. We can't simplify that any further, so that's our answer, 9 over 20. Write 0.85 as a percentage. That's just going to be 85%. Write 1 over 10 as a percentage. Now, 1 over 10 as a percentage, we can do the whole times by 10 equals to 100, or you can just multiply the bottom by 10 and the top by 10. So 1 times by 10 gives you 10, and 10 times by 10 gives you 100. Now, 10 over 100 is equal to 10%, so we can leave it at that. Write 60% as a decimal. That's just going to be 0.6. Write 0.37 as a percentage. That's going to be 37% because we multiply this by 100 and then the decimal point goes 2 stops to the right, and that gives us 37. Write 19% as a fraction. That's just going to be 19 over 100. Write 40 as a fraction of 140. Give your answer in its simplest form. So essentially they're asking us to do 40 over 140 and then simplify. Now we can cross off the 2 zeros and now we're left with 4 over 14. Both numbers are even, so we can divide both of them by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2 and 14 divided by 2 is 7. We can't simplify that any further, so that's our answer, 2 over 7. Write 0.45 as a percentage. That's just going to be 45%. Write 3 over 4 as a percentage. So let's just multiply it by 100 over 1. Multiply the top two together, that gives us 300. Multiply the bottom two together, that gives us 4. Now both numbers are even, so we can divide them by 2. So 300 divided by 2 is 150. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 150 divided by 2 is 75. So our answer is 75%. Write 30% as a fraction in its simplest form. So 30 as a fraction would be 30 over 100. Now let's start simplifying. Firstly, we can cross off 1 0 here and 1 0 here. So that leaves us with 3 over 10. Now there's no number other than 1 that goes into both 3 and 10. So that is going to be our simplest answer, 3 over 10. Okay, write 1 over 10 as a decimal. 1 over 10 is going to be equal to 10 over 100, which is equal to 10%. So 10% as a decimal is 0.1. And 10% as a percentage is 10%, obviously. Write 1 over 5 as a percentage. Now, 1 over 5, we can multiply the top and bottom by 2, and that'll give us 2 and 10. Now, we can multiply the top and bottom by 10, and that'll give us 20 over 100. Now, 20 over 100 is 20%. Write 0.64 as a percentage. That's just going to be 64%. Write 70% as a decimal. That's just going to be 0.7. Write 0.38 as a percentage. That's just going to be 38%. Write 3 over 10 as a percentage. Now, 3 over 10 is the same as 30 over 100, which is the same as 30%. So our answer is 30%. Shade 3/4 of this shape. Now, notice over here, the denominator is 4. And if we want 4 squares, we can just look at the top 4 over here rather than the whole thing. So whatever we shade in the top 4 squares, we can also do to the bottom to make it 3/4 of the overall shape. For example, if I shade in 1, 2, and 3 over here, I just need to do the same thing at the bottom, and that is 3/4 of the entire shape shaded. Another way you could have done this is you could have calculated that 3/4 is the same as 6 over 8. Over here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 squares in total. So this fraction makes it a lot simpler because now we understand that we need to shade 6 out of 8 squares. So 2, 4, 6, and that's the end of that. Shade 0.25 of this shape. Now, my advice would be to convert the 0.25 into either a fraction, decimal, or percentage, whatever you find easiest, and then start shading in. So for example, for me, I find working with fractions quite easy. So I know that 0.25 is the same as 1 over 4. I have 8 squares here in total, so let me just multiply both of these numbers by 2 to give me 2 over 8, and now I know exactly how many squares I have to shade in. It's just 2. Change 0.3 into a fraction. So 0.3 is just 30%, which is the same as 30 over 100. It's not asking us to give it in its simplest form, so we just write 30 over 100. Change 0.7 into a percentage. That's just going to be 70%. Work out 3 over 4 of 36 pounds. Now, the fact that we see the of means that we have to multiply these together. So we're going to do 3 over 4 times by 36 over 1. 3 times by 36 is 108, and 4 times by 1 is 4. Both of these numbers are even, so we can divide both of them by 2. So doing that, we will get 54 on top and 2 at the bottom. 54 divided by 2 is 27, so that's our answer, 27 pounds. Write 92% as a decimal. That's just going to be 0.92. Write 3% as a fraction. That's just going to be 3 over 100. Work out 5% of 400 grams. Now, 10% of 400 grams is really easy to work out because we have an invisible decimal point over here and we just move it one stop to the left. So that would mean that 10% is equal to 40. Now, 5% would be equal to half of 10% because 5 is half of 10. So we can do the same thing with this number over here. Half of 40 is going to be 20. So 5% is equal to 20. Nikolai buys petrol from his local garage. On Monday, he filled up his tank. On Tuesday, his tank was 3/4 full. What fraction of the full tank of petrol had he used? Well, he used 1/4. Write 3 over 4 as a decimal. That's going to be 0.75. Write 3 over 4 as a percentage. That will be 75%. A newspaper reporter did a survey. He asked people what was their favorite leisure activity. The table gives some information about the answers he got. So 22% of people said home improvements, 14% of people said shopping, 9% of people said gardening, and there's a blank space for all the others. So the first question is asking us to complete the table. So all we need to do is add 22 with 14 and 9, and that will give us 45. Now 100 take away 45 is equal to 55. So that would mean that 55% goes over here. Write 9% as a decimal. That's just going to be 0.09. Now, some of you are going to say, wait, should it not be 0.9? Well, no. 0.9 will be 90%. 400 people were asked in the survey. How many people said their favorite leisure activity was gardening? Well, gardening was 9%, so we just need to figure out 9% of 400. Now, the easiest way to do this would be to find 10% and then take away 1% from there, and that would give you 9%. So let's figure out 10% and 1%. Now, to figure out 10%, we just take this decimal point, which is over here, take it one stop to the left, so 10% is 40. To figure out 1%, we just go 2 spaces to the left, so 1, 2. So we would end up with 4 for 1%. Now, remember this. We are going to do 10% take away 1%, so 40 take away 4, that gives us 36. So our answer is 36 people said that their favorite leisure activity was gardening. Okay, thank you very much for watching that video. Hopefully you got something valuable out of that. Make sure to check out some of the other videos on the channel because we are going through every single topic in the entire GCSE Maths syllabus.